My name is Nada, and here on my YouTube channel I talk about literally whatever I want. In today's video we will be talking about all of the books that I read throughout the months of honestly June, July, and August, because I only have one book for June and then I have a few more for July and August. I read the most this August that I have read in a single month in maybe like 10 years. I went on such an interesting journey with my reading and my books over the course of the summer. I feel like I had an awakening, a second reading life began for me. We're going to start with My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell for the only book that I read in June. Oh, I should probably do a trigger warning. Trigger warning for My Dark Vanessa for sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and PTSD. So if you experience any of those things, if any of those things are triggering to you, there'll be a timestamp like right here somewhere so you can skip to the next book. But yes, so I read My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This one has been on my TBR for a very long time. I'm kind of like morbidly fascinated with the story, with the book Lolita, in a similar way that I'm morbidly fascinated with the television show Law and Order SVU. I think I'm just really interested in taboo topics, and I'm interested in the ways that we can prevent these horrible things from happening to people by looking at our taboos in the face and facing them as things that occur rather than pretending like they don't. So My Dark Vanessa is, if you haven't been on the internet in the past 2 years, it is the story of a girl named Vanessa Y, I think, who goes to a private school in Maine, and there she begins to be abused by one of the teachers at the school, a man named Slade. I have no memory of what his name is. And it basically flashes between I think 2000 and 2017. 2017 when like the Me Too movement is happening and he is being outed as an abuser. Like other students have accused him of grooming and abuse, and 2000 when he is grooming and abusing Vanessa. And in the 2017 part, she's coming to terms with understanding the relationship that they had as one that was inherently had a power imbalance rather than as her first love. This one was a frustrating read for me. I think I would give it maybe 3.7 to 3.9 stars because I did enjoy the story and I do think it's a very important story to tell, but like the pacing of it was very difficult. This was one of the books that I listened to on audio tape. It's read by Grace Gummer, I'm pretty sure. It's either Grace or Mamie Gummer, one of Meryl Streep's children. It's read by her, and she played the main character in this teen Nick TV show called Spectacular that I absolutely loved. It was about like the children of celebrities in Los Angeles and the shenanigans they get up to. And so hearing her read this book, I was like thrown back to my own childhood, and like the things that she was describing were so kind of like gruesome and gross that I was like, I don't know, it was a very disjointed experience for me. She reads the book and she does it very well, but I swear to God, I had to listen to this book on 2x speed. Like I was like, I just have to get through this because I wanted to know what was going to happen, but I also was like grossed out and freaked out, and I don't know, something about the pacing was just like, it was just going so slowly. It was going so slowly. I was like, we all know where this is going. Like, we can get there in a timely manner. While I think it's an incredibly powerful story to tell when we have the perspective of Vanessa being somebody who does not realize that the relationship that she was in was abusive, it gets to feel a little bit stock character-y and like just a little I liked how the teacher was portrayed. For some reason, when I was reading, I could only think of David Harbour from Stranger Things. And so the entire time I was imagining him in all of these scenes. She's like explicitly describing things that the teacher, Strain, his name is Strain. Oh, that's symbolic. Things that Strain is doing to Vanessa. And I was like picturing David Harbour. I want to throw up. He wasn't just like flatly a villain. I mean, nothing to me about him was appealing, but you can see like his charisma, the way he interacts with the other teachers. He has that dimension of, he does all of the trappings of being the like good guy, like asking for her consent before he does things. He's like, we don't have to kiss, we don't have to have a sleepover, you don't have to come to my house, we don't have to do any of that unless you're comfortable with it. But then when it's time to put the pedal to the metal and he has to take responsibility for his actions, he puts everything on her, and he's like too much of a coward to accept what he's done. So he scapegoats a 15-year-old girl and ends up ruining her reputation, basically. So I don't know, it's a really fascinating character study. It's a really interesting book full of very complex characters that I do wish was maybe like 70, 79 pages shorter. Okay, so next up I have a book that has been on my TBR literally for 7 years, since 2015. I bought this in 2015. This is Her Name in the Sky by Kelly Quinlan. This is a story about two girls named Baker and Hannah. Named Baker and Hannah, the whitest names that ever whited, who go to a Catholic high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they realize over the course of the book that they are in love with each other, they have feelings for each other, and it shows you how they navigate the emergence of these feelings, what the people in their community do about them, and basically just how they like come to know themselves as gay Catholic women. So good. So much interesting theology about I think this hit me in a way that it probably would not hit most people who were not raised Catholic as I was. It's something you would never know if you met me in person. I never talk about it. I will say, like, I would probably give this like a 4.4 out of 5 stars because it's such a good story. It's so well written. It's so well written. There's so many beautiful images in this book and beautiful descriptions, and like it does that thing where all of the chapters are kind of named after different like it like takes you through the Catholic liturgical year, basically. I love the characters of Baker and Hannah. I think they're so interesting and fun. I will say I do feel like this is written in third person, third person limited. So it's mostly from Hannah's perspective, but you're not like in her voice. She's not saying like, I did this, I did that. So there is like a little bit of distance that does at times make the characters feel flat. What makes up for that is the plot and the way that the plot progresses. This is a long book. It's a long book, but it didn't feel slow. I'm pretty sure I read this. I read like the first 60 pages in one sitting. Then I read the next 50 pages in one sitting. Then I finished this entire chunk of the book in one night. Like there was one night I couldn't sleep. I read it from midnight to 5 a.m. And I was enthralled. I will say this was written in 2011, which was 2014, sorry, which to me was very much like the era of people being like, the best gay representation is representation where gay people are wholeheartedly accepted by those around them and doesn't really grapple with the reality of a lot of queer people's lives, which is that they're not. And so there's this fear throughout that, oh, this is a spoiler. If you don't want to hear spoilers, skip to the next book. But there's this fear that undergirds the entire first 3/4 of this book that when these people come out, they might be disowned by their families because their families are Catholic. None of the authority figures in this book react negatively to the news that these two girls are gay. And I just don't know that that's realistic, especially in a Catholic school environment in Louisiana. I think it would have made for a more interesting or textured story if even just one of the girls' families was super not accepting and the other one was like, okay, we'll take you in, or we'll take care of you, or you don't have to worry about that, because that's such a reality for people. I think what I'm trying to say is this was written in an era where we were worried about having good representation more than we were worried about having honest, truthful representation. And if you're looking for good representation about Catholic WLWs, this is for you. I recommend it so much. But if you're the type of person who like wants a tearjerker with a sad ending, don't read this, because you would assume that that's what it would give, but it doesn't. Okay, so following on the theme of Catholicism and problems within the church, we have Betrayal, the Crisis in the Catholic Church, the findings of the investigation that inspired the major motion picture Spotlight. This is another one that was like years in the making. I know the light has changed drastically. We're giving you like fireside chats vibes. That's what's happening here, because there's only so much I can do on an independent contractor salary. We're just gonna go with it. We're just gonna accept it. This is a book about the Catholic priest again, trigger warning for sexual abuse of children in particular. This is a book about the Catholic priest sexual abuse scandal that the Boston Globe helped reveal in the very early 2000s. The writing in this is a nonfiction book, so it's very dry. It's very journalistically written, very well written, journalistically speaking. But if you're looking for like a piece of literature to sink your teeth into, this is not it. If you want to learn a lot about the extent of child abuse within the Catholic Church and how much and how long the church has essentially sanctioned it. Somebody told a story about being molested by a priest in the 1920s in this book, and his parents were mad at him because they thought he was saying something rude about a priest. So it's bad, it's horrible. Each like page, each story you read is worse than the last. This is the type of thing that has lifelong repercussions on the people who are forced to go through it by these people in power. There's seems to be a big hullabaloo about like, well, if priests could just get married. I want you to understand that men who are married also molest children. It's not about sex, it's about power. And there's clearly some power dynamics that are built into the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. I mean, if you even just think about it, it's such a hierarchical homosocial organization. A lot of them, even if they had a wife at home, would still be doing the things that they're doing to children. They're doing it because they want power. They're doing it because they were socialized to understand this as a way that they exact and enact their power in the world. And so until we change the way that the church ordains and teaches priests, this is not letting priests get married is not going to be the big like band-aid to put over the child sex abuse allegations. The way that these incredibly misogynistic societies develop with such like a hatred towards women and femininity and such an emphasis on masculinity and male power, it breeds this tendency towards abuse of men and boys that is then quieted by shaming them and calling them weak and emasculating them for revealing it. There's deep structural change that has to happen to the church in order to stop child sex abuse from happening. It's not just like a quick fix band-aid. The next book, this is the beginning of my metamorphosis, okay? I'm a changed girly. I've said so many times over the years, I hate classics. I don't like classics. Classics are just boring to me. I'm not interested in classics. Well, do you want to know what? Across the months of July and August, I read almost every single book that Jane Austen wrote, and I liked them. I finally read Pride and Prejudice, and it was so good. I was like, this is why they're called classics, huh? Because this is a classic. Like, who would have thought? It was so good. The story, the pacing, it was both incredibly gossipy and also scandalous. It's literally just a book about people going to each other's houses and talking shit. And I love to talk shit. And I guess country life in England in the the early 1800s was just like walking around the estate that you grew up on, riding to your neighbor's house 5 miles away, and then like going to London to stay with a family friend for 4 months. Now, having read 5 out of 6 or 5 out of 7 of Jane Austen's books, all of her protagonists are just lesbians who are married to men. We're getting into August now, the books that I read in August. I read Sense and Sensibility, in order. I read Emma, Sense and Sensibility, and Northanger Abbey. If you've never read the original book, this is the story of Emma, a young girl who takes a liking to matchmaking after she matches her governess with a kind of like well-off man in her village. She's from pretty much the richest family in the town that she lives in, and from her perch, like from her high horse, she kind of like looks down on everyone around her and like thinks that she knows what's best for everyone. This girl named Harriet Smith, who has dubious parentage, they don't know who her dad is, but he's paying for her education at this girls' school. She comes into town and Emma kind of takes her under her wing, decides she's going to find a match for her, and then is also like, there's other like country politics happening. I don't think I was quite sold on the romance aspect of Emma. I just didn't really care. Her love interest in this book is Mr. Knightley. He says something kind of creepy where he's like, I've loved you since first day I saw you. She was 13 and he was 9 the first day he saw her, so -5 points for that. Similarly, in Sense and Sensibility, this is the story of 2 sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, I think, who are their father. Basically, it's actually a really interesting story, and I love that Jane Austen talks about this in a lot of her books, like what happens to girls and women who do not have the security of marriage or a family fortune to protect them. Because basically, like in the 1800s, if you didn't have a father or brother who was willing to protect you or who had the means to protect you, you were kind of just on your own. And so in Sense and Sensibility, the 2 sisters, well, 3 sisters, Marianne, Eleanor, the sisters are basically, they have to leave their house because their dad dies, and they live in the house that their great uncle or something owned, I think. And before their dad died, he had decided to entail the entire property to their brother from their father's previous marriage. Him and his wife and their son get the home that they live in, and they basically have like 6 months to figure out where they're gonna move, or they probably wouldn't kick them out on the street, but like they'd make their lives very unpleasant in this house. Their brother's wife is a piece of, her name's Fanny, piece of hot boiled shit. I hope she died in a carriage accident. I hope she got ran over by 1,000 horses. I hope she choked out in a fire. I hope she died on the toilet of cholera, yellow fever. I hope she got tuberculosis and it was slow and painful. She is horrid. But father's dying wish was that the brother would take care of his second wife and his younger siblings, his younger sisters. his wife convinces him that he doesn't actually have to do that. And she's basically like, I don't want you to take any money away from our son, so don't give anything to your sisters. And he doesn't. And then they have to move to a cottage that's far away from where they grew up. And then hijinks ensue. It was not the most interesting book that I have ever read. First of all, -5 points because the colonel is like 35 and the sister, I want to say her name is Marianne, but I don't remember, who he's in love with, is like 16. She doesn't marry him until she's 19, I don't think, but I'm still like, I just was wondering if he could find somebody a little bit more age appropriate. He definitely could. Like, he had, when I was listening to the book on audiobook, he had way more chemistry with Eleanor, who's like 20 something, I don't know, 23, than he did with the sister that he was in love with. It was a very frustrating story to read because these people were consistently done dirty, and had not done anything to anyone around them. Marianne was like a little annoying, but that was her biggest fault. But yeah, that was Sense and Sensibility. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Maybe like 3.3 out of 5 stars, which seems harsh. It would be hard had like appropriate perspective. Like we see 3 stars as like not good enough when sometimes things are just 3 stars, and that's fine. Like 3 stars is average. So next up I read Northanger Abbey, which I bought at Winchester Cathedral in England, which is where Jane Austen is buried. I wanted to buy one Jane Austen novel while I was there, and this is the one that I was interested in because this is basically a parody of Gothic novels. And if you know me, you know I'm obsessed with the Bronte sisters. I find them to be hilarious. This was actually written, I'm pretty sure, before they were born, so it's not a direct like response to them or any of their writing, just like the Gothic genre as a whole. But ooh, some of the things that she said in this, it's like the Brontes read this and were like, I'm going to do exactly everything that you're making fun of. Basically, this is the story of a young woman named Catherine Morland who is really obsessed with Gothic novels. She goes to Bath with her family friends. She's kind of like plain and boring, but she just wants to have like a nice, exciting summer. So she goes to Bath and ends up meeting 2 families, the Thorpes and the Tilneys. The Thorpes, who are an acquaintance of the family friends that she's staying with, and the Tilneys, whose son she meets while she's like at a party one night, and she immediately takes a liking to him. The Tilneys are incredibly wealthy, basically, and they live in this old abbey called Northanger Abbey, like an old convent, and she befriends the Thorpes initially, and soon her brother becomes engaged to one of the Thorpe daughters, Isabella, who's like one of her closest friends. But then over time she kind of gets to see who they really are, and then starts to spend more time with the Tilneys, who are a very traditional, genteel, old money aristocratic family from England. She goes to stay with them at their old Gothic house called Northanger Abbey, and hijinks ensue because she has read all of these Gothic novels, and she just like completely invents this like story about the Tilneys. I would say like I would give this like a 4.3 out of 5 stars. It was so fun and so funny because like Jane Austen is funny. Like, she's hilarious. She's a Sagittarius, so we're not surprised, but like the way that she makes fun of Catherine, they said this bitch is boring and she's ugly and she's plain and nobody really knows why anyone's interested in her, but let me tell you a story about her life anyway. Like, she's funny. So I liked like all of the ways that she was kind of like poking fun at and satirizing Gothic literature, because it can be incredibly melodramatic, as I said earlier. And I really liked the central romance between Catherine and, I think his name is James Tilney. I don't know, it just like, it gave me little tinglies. I really wanted to see them end up together, especially because Catherine seems like such a sweet, if a little not all there, young woman. And she also has like no prospects, so the idea of her marrying this incredibly wealthy guy, it was like good for her. But end felt very rushed. Like, the end, I think, could have been an entire 50 pages, and it's published posthumously, I think. So it might have been one that Jane Austen was never really intending to release. I haven't really looked into that. I haven't really looked it up. So maybe she just like didn't get a chance to finish it, or she was like, I don't really care about that anymore. But I just thought that that was something that was interesting to note, because she has a couple of posthumously published books. And whenever things like that happen, I'm like, did this person want this out in the world, or did somebody just say like, oh, we know that this writer is popular, so let's get this out there? The last Jane Austen novel that I read was Mansfield Park. I sigh because I watched the movie and I was so incredibly bored, and then I was reading the book and I was so incredibly bored until like literally 70% of the way through the audiobook. Fanny Price is, she's born to a mother and father who are not very wealthy. Her mother was from like an aristocratic family, decided to marry this guy who didn't really have any prospects, and then had a bunch of kids, so like they just are persona non grata in their family. Her aunt's husband and one of her aunts decide that they are going to take her in and raise her at their family estate, Mansfield Park, because their family is incredibly wealthy. She is treated very poorly by everyone in the house. They basically treat her like she is a mooching leech who is made out of shit piles and does not deserve to breathe the same air as her, this child that they voluntarily brought into their own home. Fanny is very poorly treated by most people in her family, except her cousin Edmund, who she begins to fall in love with because he's the only person who's nice to her. I was like so painfully bored for so much of this book, and then all of the like there's like good fun steamy scandalous stuff that happens in here that I won't actually spoil, so that you can go read it and suffer through it the same way that I did. But it all happens off screen, so you don't see any of it. I guess because like I sounded very much like a Dora Delano. Party. That is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. So the last two books that I read in the month of August were both sapphic love stories. One Last Stop I really enjoyed. I had started reading it earlier on in the year, but it was kind of hard. Like I was listening to the audiobook, and to me August felt very whiny. So I kind of like bounced off it, but then I decided if you watched my first video on this channel, I have like a long project where I'm trying to read all of these books that I have bought over the years. So I had bought that one like a couple years ago. I saw it on my shelf. I was like, you're next. It ended up being so good, so interesting, really fun. I like the story. The one thing I will say is that like the magic system is kind of unwieldy, but I think that was also the point. I really loved the world that McQuiston was able to create. I have like a very complicated relationship with the city of New York City in media, because I feel like so many people experience something there. Like there's some magic there that I'm just not tuned into. And maybe it's because I grew up next to like a city. Like I grew up near Washington, D.C. So like if I wanted to have that exciting experience, I literally could just drive 15 minutes and be right there. But if you grew up somewhere that isn't like that, like the middle of Kansas or Iowa or literally anywhere in most of the United States, I mean, that's not to say that any of those places are like bad places or whatever, but it's just like not the kind of experience of New York City is not as accessible to people who live in those places. It felt like a very long advertisement for the city of New York, and it's not for me. There's this whole like anti-gentrification plot line in it too, and I'm like, I feel like people are like, I anti-gentrification, but also I want to move to this place, so I'm gonna do it. And it's like, you're gentrifying by moving there. They made it look like this because they want you to come. It's kind of hard to fight against. It's because it's the way the world is set up. It's not your fault. It's just like, it's the way it is. But 10 out of 10. Yes, they do on the train, because part of the plot of the book is that this girl is stuck on a train from the night. This girl from the 1970s is stuck on the train. This girl from 2020 meets her and decides that she's gonna get her out. That's pretty much the whole plot of the book. But yeah, so the last book that I read, Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This one was fine. It's fine. It's like the classic Mark movie plot arc where a plucky big city upstart goes back home for some event or family guilt trip and then ends up falling in love with someone from their hometown and is like, oh shucks, but I have this whole life in the big city. Am I gonna leave it behind just to stay here for love or go back? It's pretty much the plot of Delilah Green Doesn't Care. It's about a woman named Delilah Green who goes back to the place where she grew up, where she lost her dad to photograph her stepsister's upcoming nuptials. She re-meets her stepsister's best friend, Claire. The way that I don't remember any of these people's names, they're just like not memorable to me. She re-meets her stepsister's best friend, Claire. Claire has a young daughter and they end up falling in love. It's a thing about like New York as a place where like people who aren't accepted in other places can go, but like the thing that's interesting to me about Delilah Green is that she doesn't really have any friends. I think that's the same thing that I felt when I was reading One Last Stop. I'm not interested. I kind of hate protagonists who don't have friends when they very easily could. I don't know why. Maybe I'm triggered. I don't know, like actually triggered. I don't know, but like something about reading about a person who just doesn't have friends and is always like, I don't have friends, like I'm a loner, I'm alone, I don't make relationships with people because relationships hurt me. I'm like, we can grow and change and evolve from that trauma. Like we don't have to stay stuck in that place. Find protagonists who don't have communities or networks kind of boring, mostly just because a lot of the way that I think character develops, in my mind at least, is through how they interact with other people. So when they're not interacting with other people, I'm just supposed to like watch you walk around your apartment like a sim. Like, what are we doing here? But I guess part of her character arc is that she gets friends by the end of the story, so whatever. But yeah, it was fine. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was cute. It was exactly what I was looking for, which was like a fun sapphic romance that was not super high stakes. Although it started to feel very high stakes because Delilah Green's family are cunts. Isabel, her stepmom Isabel, what a fucking bitch, bro. Like, oh, I hate her. And it's a similar thing. It's the same way that I feel about Mrs. Norris from Mansfield Park, as like her in the book. Delilah's dad passes away shortly after he marries Isabel. It's not even shortly after, it's 2 years after he marries and then Isabel is left raising Delilah because her mom had passed away when she was, and it's like, you are the person who decided to marry her father. When you marry someone, you also marry their children. So why wouldn't you just go marry someone who didn't have kids instead of taking this child into your life, and then when something that is completely out of their control happens, you treat them like they are worse than dog poop that you stepped on the sidewalk. I had to see more of that aspect of the book, like Delilah's relationship with Isabel and how and I guess just like see more of Isabel getting her comeuppance. But Astrid has a sequel. I think this is going to be a trilogy. There's going to be a sequel with Astrid and then another one with Iris, and I think they're all going to be sapphic WLW books. I don't know. But anyways, this is my very long June, July, and August wrap up. Let me know if you had any concurring thoughts, any opposing thoughts about the books that I read in the comments down below. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching this video. That's all I really have to say.